And I'm going to now ask our next panel, the Around the Nation panel, to come on. We have Debra Calhoun, Senior Vice President, Waterways Council, Inc., Emily Parker, Senior Route Analyst, Storm Geo, and Sean Duffy, Executive Director, Big River Coalition. Thank you all very much for joining us today. And Debra Calhoun, there's obviously some concern about what's going on with the Army Corps of Engineers budget, and I hope you'll be able to address that for us because I know you're really close to that. But you are our first speaker. Welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, Stas. I bring you greetings from Paducah, Kentucky. We are at the confluence of the Ohio and Tennessee rivers and not very far from the Mississippi River. So I will give you an update on what's happening on the inland waterways system. Next slide, Todd, please. Just want to tell you a little bit about Waterways Council. We are essentially a lobbying organization. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. We really lobby Congress on the appropriation side to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers has, actually next slide, Todd, to make sure that the Army Corps has at least efficient funding to be able to build out the system, the lock and dam infrastructure, to make sure that it's efficient, modern, reliable. You'll see some of the organizations that belong to us, some of the sectors. We represent everyone from those commercial towboat operators to all of the agriculture producers and suppliers, moving those key commodities on the system, as well as energy products. We have organized labor, moderate conservation organizations, and inland ports as well. Next slide. So why those voices are really needed under WCI's umbrella is this. More than half, 81% of our nation's locks that were built in the 1930s and really some in the 1900s on the inland waterway system are well beyond their 50 years of age, and they require recapitalization. I know many of the locks on the West Coast are much younger, but this is a problem that we continue to deal with, and we see catastrophic failures on the inland waterway system. Excuse me, next slide. The other sort of bad news of the story is that there are significant cost overruns and operational delays when it comes to building out the inland waterways lock and dam projects, some at 544% over budget, and not delivered in more than 30 years in the United States of America. So some of this is due to inflation, workforce challenges, supply chain delays, but the Corps really could improve its project delivery through a couple of things like earlier contractor involvement, more efficient project scoping and design, more streamlined project planning, more accurate cost estimations, and better industry communication. We are working, Waterways Council and its members are working very closely with the Corps at headquarters and the divisions and the districts to improve upon this process and get back to in the 1980s and early 90s when we could deliver these projects closer to a 10 to 12 year period than 30 plus years. Next slide. But really, despite the age of the infrastructure and some of the project delivery challenges that we have, this is really just a quick snapshot of the inland waterway system overall that really highlights the critical importance of it to the nation and to the transportation supply chain. Essentially, it is the safest, most environmentally sound and energy efficient mode of surface transportation. We're moving over 500 million tons of cargo, those key commodities that are valued at nearly $190 billion. We're touching 28 states across 12,000 navigable miles. 540 some thousand jobs are connected across the nation in some way to inland navigation. So very critically important system to the nation and to our supply chain. Next slide. This is just a look at sort of what's moving on the inland waterways system. We actually, because of the government shutdown, we are a little bit behind getting the stats and data that we need from the Corps. So this is sort of an outdated slide from, I think, 2023, but we're hoping to get 2024 soon. So we will get that and post that soon. This is really what's moving on the system, with petroleum and coal energy products dominating, but certainly grains and aggregate materials for the construction industry coming on strong, again valued at about $190 billion. Next slide. In terms of energy and what's being moved, here in Kentucky, of course, coal is big, but in Nashville, for example, Nashville is only about 2 hours from here. They are now moving more than 60% of their gasoline by barge. So in calendar year 24, you can see that it's about 60%, and back in calendar year 14, it was less than 2%, and that's really because the pipelines are maxed out in the Nashville area. And so we are looking at, additional uses for barge movements on the system. And so that'll be important, certainly, as Nashville sort of explodes in terms of its construction and big corporations continuing to move into the Nashville area. And also not a lot of public transportation, no metro in Nashville. Everybody drives their car like they do in California. Next slide. This is just a quick reminder of the capacity of barges on the inland waterway system and how much congestion is relieved on our highways and railways. Just one standard 15 barge tow, and many south of St. Louis, for example, where there are no locks, you're seeing 42, 45 and more barges. But on a standard 15 barge tow, where there are locks and dams, that has the same capacity as 1,050 trucks on our roads and highways, and 216 rail cars and 6 locomotives. So again, traffic tremendous in California. So this is a slide to keep in mind as you're trying to get somewhere after this conference today. Not so much traffic here in Paducah, which I appreciate, but great capacity on the inland waterways. Next slide. Of course, agriculture remains keenly dependent on the inland waterways. We just got through harvest and in low water, and thanks to the Army Corps of Engineers for the work that they did on expediting dredging and making sure that they were taking care of those hot spots so that those key commodities of agriculture finished product could be moving on. More than 65% of our grain exports are moving by inland waterways, by barge. Here's just a couple of factoids from the inland waterways, and really their report says it all. A reliable waterway system is important to agriculture, and it will remain so. Now we would just like to see China coming up to buying what they promised to in their soybean purchases. So we want to see that move along. Next slide. The inland waterways are also key to national security, and this is always an important point to make. They continue to move military equipment by barge around the country, and if needed, to military theaters around the world. That shot on the right is military equipment moving from Kentucky Lock and from Fort Campbell in Tennessee to through Kentucky Lock, and some of the things on the left to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and back. So an important point to make in terms of national security and having that play a defense role for our nation. Next slide. There has always been a role for the federal government to play since the founding of the nation in operations and maintenance with regard to the inland waterways. The dredging that I mentioned during low water, and we could be in high water at any day. Sometimes we see low and high water in the same season of shipping. The operations and maintenance budget that is fully federally funded is what pays for that channel maintenance work and that dredging. So again, the nation's inland waterways still rooted in the U.S. Constitution. There are so many beneficiaries that depend upon this, not just those shippers, but as I said, for national security, for hydropower, for recreation and tourism, for commercial property development, and of course, those commercial operations. Next slide. This slide just sort of lays out the impact that Waterways Council has had in helping to get higher funding for the Army Corps' Civil Works mission. to modernize that lock and dam infrastructure on the system. So since FY14, we've been able to deliver more than $5 billion. That's through annual appropriations, certainly through emergency supplemental appropriations where appropriate, and for things like the infrastructure bill. So we're proud of being able to deliver a significant amount of additional money to the Corps of Engineers for their important work. Next slide. This is the latest funding chart. As you know, everything has been a bit stalled, certainly as it relates to energy and water development appropriations bill funding for the Army Corps Civil Works budget. The House passed their bill back in early September, but it is stalled in the Senate. We understand that there is an agreement on a bill. I think one of your previous speakers mentioned WRDA 2026, and that being bipartisan. Usually funding for energy and water is also a bipartisan effort. And so we're hoping to see that continues. And we hope to see the energy and water bill rolled into probably a omnibus or a minibus bill that we'll be seeing hopefully soon. But as you can see, this is the red line is what was appropriated by Congress, and the blue line is what the president has requested. So pretty much if you look at the blue line, pretty much low requests by the president, and then the appropriated level on the red line and moving up, up, up. That's what we want to see. Office of Management and Budget has always been very austere in its funding of inland waterways projects. And so we work very hard and have been very thankful to Congress for being able to raise the amount of money to keep work moving for that very important work on the modernization of the inland waterway system, its locks and dams. We understand through continuing resolution discussions in Washington, normally in a continuing resolution, earmarks are not allowed. There may be a change coming for this cycle anyway. There is discussion about allowing earmarks for some of the programs, and certainly the Corps has benefited greatly from earmarks for our projects. So we hope to see an announcement made soon that earmarks can be included in the funding that's under the current continuing resolution. That would really help us greatly. And as I said, hoping to see the Senate move on energy and water and get that ready to roll out. Next slide. It's my last slide. If you're interested in learning more about Waterways Council, please visit us at waterwayscouncil.org. If anyone is interested in receiving our action alerts about what we're doing with Congress, what we expect to see in WRDA or on the appropriations process, text the word locks to the number that you see on the screen, 202-979-0993, and you can be added to our Action Alert Network and be in the know on the inland waterways system, Stas.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions, but I think I want to get through our speakers and then come back to you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Emily Parker, Senior Route Analyst, Storm Geo. Emily.
Hey, hi, Stas. Thank you for having me here today. Todd, could you pull up my slides, please? Yeah, so today I'll be talking about the future of Arctic navigation, which may become a major seaway in the near future. I'll be touching on the possible routes through this area, along with an example of a ship that sailed along the Northern Sea Route, touch on the effects of climate change, and end on geopolitical issues. Next slide, please. So there are 3 route options across the Arctic Ocean: the Transpolar Route, the Northwest Passage, and the Northern Sea Route. The Transpolar Route is not commercially viable as the Central Arctic lacks coastal infrastructure and is too risky with thick multi-year ice, or ice that persists year after year, as opposed to seasonal first-year ice, which melts and reforms every year. The Northwest Passage is historically significant. Explorers sought it for centuries as a shortcut between Europe and Asia, or the North American West Coast, but it's not yet a major commercial shipping corridor in the way the Suez or Panama Canal routes are. It's more considered to be a continuous passage between islands and the continental mainland of Canada rather than an actual shipping route. Then there's the Northern Sea Route, which is considered the most advanced Arctic route at this time. Russia has existing infrastructure along the coast, along with more state support like an extensive icebreaker fleet and pilot services, and they have deep water ports and are building more. Though traversing this passage is still risky due to limited search and rescue and emergency support. Because emergency response centers are limited, distances between them are great, and response times may take days to weeks. Costs are high as well due to icebreaker escorts, insurance, and transit fees. However, Russia is investing heavily in expanding their icebreaker fleet to support the corridor, along with more maintenance and emergency stations, weather and ice monitoring systems, and traffic management. Next slide, please. There are 3 different ways to transit through ice. Ordinary cargo vessels with no special ice strengthening require an icebreaker escort, which is shown in the image on the right. Ice strengthened vessels have special designs like extra hull plating or stronger framing and are built to handle some level of ice contact, though are still limited in independent navigation. Then there are icebreaker vessels, which have a special pointed hull design that allows the ship to break the ice and lead convoys. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a specialized ice-strengthened vessel sailing from Penglai in China to Murmansk in Russia in the winter of 2024. For reference, several major geographical regions have been labeled here, and the ice is colored in black. We assisted the vessel until they reached Bering Strait, at which time the vessel transitioned to being under the guidance of a series of ice pilots along the Northern Sea Route until they arrived at their destination. The vessel sailed about 11 knots in ice-free waters from Penglai to Bering Strait and across the Kara and Barents Seas, and sailed about 3 knots through the ice. Next slide, please. So the main attractions for routes through the Arctic are reduced distance and reduced time. It's estimated that a route via the Arctic could save several days to a couple weeks of sailing time when compared to typical routes via the Suez Canal or rounding Africa. However, these estimations are more likely for ice-free conditions without any major delays. In this example, because the vessel sailed about 3 knots through ice conditions, their voyage lasted longer than an example through the Suez Canal, despite being about 5,400 nautical miles shorter. Next slide, please. So climate change is causing the Arctic to warm faster than the global average, and this is due to several factors. Some examples: as the Arctic ice melts, less sunlight is reflected back to space, and darker ocean and land are exposed, which absorbs more sunlight, and this causes more warming and more melting. Additionally, there is a net transport of heat northward from lower latitudes by both ocean currents and atmospheric circulation. And although cold Arctic air can flow southward at times, the overall energy balance still favors greater heat moving into the Arctic, which raises sea and air temperatures. Multi-year ice is diminishing and being replaced more with seasonal first-year ice, which is also thinner, so it insulates less well. It also melts faster in the summer, so more ocean is exposed throughout the year. And lastly, water or warmer air holds more moisture, and water vapor itself is a greenhouse gas, so more radiant heat is trapped. Next slide, please. Climate models project the first ice-free Arctic summer, which means less than 1 million square kilometers of ice for some time within the next 3 decades. Additionally, the Arctic Ocean could be free of multi-year ice within the next 2 decades, and this would allow for more transit through the Arctic. Next slide, please. So even as the Arctic becomes more navigable overall, it's still a dynamic, hazardous environment. Although there would be less total ice, the ice that remains would be younger, thinner, and more mobile. Winds and currents can suddenly close channels or push ice flows into narrow straits, trapping or slowing ships. Icebergs mainly come from glaciers calving off Greenland and the Canadian archipelago. They're unpredictable and can drift far into open waters and remain dangerous long after sea ice melts. Some are large enough to extend deep below the surface, making radar detection difficult. Also, less ice means more and larger waves, as winds would blow over larger regions of open ocean. When strong winds meet sub-freezing temperatures, ocean spray can freeze on contact, a process called vessel icing, which builds uneven weight on the ship and, in severe cases, can cause capsizing. Vessel icing can also temporarily disable equipment on a ship. Furthermore, with the lack of good forecasting and satellite data, it's difficult to make reliable forecasts for quick-forming polar lows. Additionally, low visibility and long nights, along with lack of emergency support, further compound navigational issues. And then there are environmental concerns to worry about, such as pollution. Next slide. Lastly, we can't discuss Arctic navigation from a purely physical or a climatic standpoint. It's necessary to realize that Arctic navigation is also political. The northern sea route is mainly through Russian territory, and given ongoing global conflicts, it's uncertain whether many companies will be willing to sail through these waters in the future. Next slide. Thank you so much. That's it for me, and I'll pass it back to you, Stas.
Thank you very much, Emily. Our next speaker is Sean Duffy, Executive Director, Big River Coalition. Sean, welcome.
Hello, Stas. We can go ahead and go to the slide. So, Sean Duffy, Big River Coalition. I'm a navigation advocate on the Mississippi River. I'm thrilled to be able to follow my good friend Deb Calhoun. She's a They do more lobbying, I do more advocating. The difference is that I spend a lot of time dealing with Mississippi River operations. And I noticed this morning that I misspelled California as a pet peeve of spelling that sticks out with me. So I'm guilty. Sorry, you can take 5 points off for spelling, Stas. th- th- I use this map a lot. I mean, it kind of highlights the size of the Mississippi River, that section that I tried to make a kind of a muddy coffee color. 1.25 million square miles of our country, parts of 31 states, two Canadian provinces, come down, passes Deb in Paducah and comes down river to the Mississippi River Ship Channel, which is where most of my operations are from Baton Rouge to the Gulf. It's about 256 miles of a ship channel that has been deepened to 50 feet. We're in the process of extending that about 5 miles, which should be completed. So we'll have 50 feet available on the river up to mile 180 above head of passes. That's 200 miles because Southwest Pass is 20 miles long. Next slide, please. Um, I'll say climate variability. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but when I speak in navigation circles, if I say climate change, I see eyes roll. And climate variability is exactly the same thing. It just people don't have a predetermined notion that they understand it or want to argue. I don't want to talk about what causes it. That's above me. I'm a navigation guy, but this slide shows kind of some of the struggles. And before 2015, somebody would have said over the next decade, you're going to open Bonnie Carey 4 times in a 3-year period and build the saltwater sill 4 times in a 3-year period in that same decade. I'm not a betting guy, but it's a good thing because I would have bet everything I own that that wouldn't happen. Up until 2015, both of those metrics held about once a decade. Um, this year was also an interesting year. On top of having a blizzard in New Orleans, we almost had to open the Bonnie Carey spillway. So where that almost is down below, it's 16.7 feet on the Carrollton gauge. We reach 1.245 million cubic feet per second during this high river stage. The trigger for operating the Bonnie Carey, which is a spillway to relieve pressure, and it's designed truthfully to protect the city of New Orleans from flooding. one of the MRT projects after the Great Flood of 1927. Um, that trigger is 1.25 million cubic feet per second. So just under operating it. And then this year we also had to build the saltwater sill, which started in September and October. The saltwater sill is a response to salinity coming up the river. I heard a couple of presentations earlier talking about it. It's a challenge here. The response is to build a sill, which I describe as a levee on the bottom of the river. Of course, salt water is heavier, stays in the bottom. That levee has successfully captured the sill from coming upriver to protect the saltwater, the freshwater intakes for the city of New Orleans. Below that, mitigation for the ship channel includes a lot of barge operations and things done to keep the lower areas of the river to try to adequately maintain them. But I've for 20 years been talking about I've tasted salt water in the lower river in Pilot Town and places and desalinization being really, really something to look at. I know Corpus Christi had a project that became a $1.3 billion project and it's on hold. We're not talking about it in New Orleans, and I think we should because our fresh water comes from this Mississippi River. Next slide, please. So here in the mayor of Hudson of New York City on the Hudson River, the many of you will know the artist Wyland. He's famous for some of the whale walls, amongst other things. But hearing the mayor of New York City say what eventually I hope the mayor of New Orleans will be say, we need to be concerned about our drinking water. Relative sea level rise, land lost, crevasses. So one of my analogies for the Mississippi River is thinking about it as a garden hose. So we have a garden hose that has a whole bunch of holes in it. Below New Orleans, we're losing a lot of flow, a huge amount of flow. In fact, the low river where we saw like 170,000 cubic feet per second, we were losing double that during a high river and multiple crevasses. Now the largest one was a crevasse known as Neptune Pass. But if you come back to the garden hose, when you put a lot of pressure, when you have a hose with leaks in it and you put a lot of pressure in it, of course, those holes get bigger. And at Neptune Pass during the High River, where we had to open Bonnie Carey in 2019, it just grew tremendously because of that high river. And then the other thing that happens where we're not a garden hose is because those crevasses connect to salt water, we're introducing salinity higher into the system in different places. And I will say I was impressed with some of the studies and talks I heard earlier today because in Louisiana, we have a lot of science, we have a lot of academic research and documentation that shows this. But as a port city, as a port state, as a large river system, we're not really addressing these concerns. I think that's all I want to say on that slide. Next one. One of the good things that Louisiana Governor Landry did is for the first time since 1992, we have a navigation task force. This navigation task force recognized some of the things I've already talked about. Pilot Town anchorage is the first anchorage that our pilots have in the river. It's really a critical emergency lane for traffic. We're moving larger and bigger ships. They can't go into that anchorage. It's the first anchorage we have where you should be able to anchor a ship at 50 feet. We have fishing boats drawing 2, 3 feet of water going aground. The challenge here is the Corps of Engineers continues to tell us they don't have the authority. I'm going to lean in on my friends from the Waterways Council. I've spoken to them, and we're hoping to see a congressional change here so that we can get that Anchorage dredge. It's a beneficial use of dredge material project. So back to the task force, that the ones in bold are related to the deep draft, the Mississippi River Ship Channel, aids the navigation, I think, around the country. There's a lack of funding, lack of ability to maintain, and those aids are really important to safe navigation. One of the lessons learned after the Francis Scott Key Bridge was because construction was going on, the pilot was able to reach out to police on either side of the vehicle and shut down traffic. I don't think we can put police at each bridge on the river, but maybe message boards, the old Bugs Bunny Bridge out sign. Hopefully, we'd be able to convince the public to pay attention to that. We've been working closer and closer with the state agency, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, for coastal restoration projects, which, as you looked at Rotterdam earlier, we're trying to maintain the status quo at best right now, not going higher, which I think is shows our vulnerability. The NOAA port system is in some ways like aids the navigation, but it includes things like air gap sensors on bridges, current meters. We've got them significant funding and we're moving them forward. But of course, as we got the funding, we have things like government shutdown. And Francis Scott Key kind of changed some of the policies from NOAA for air gaps. The large crevasses I've kind of already mentioned. Go to the next slide, please. So this shows the beneficial use. This is a response from navigation, along with the Corps, state agencies, pilots, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and it was truthfully an idea. In 2009, we tried to use cutterhead dredges to maintain Southwest Pass. We had 100 acres that first year. It was supposed to be a test. The good thing is, right after it happened, the pilots started calling me like, Sean, this is great. We need to do more of this. Cutter heads are different than hopper dredges. They're anchored in, so they can be viewed as kind of an obstruction. The pilots have to deal with one-way traffic around them the whole time they're there for months at a time. But because of the beneficial use, because of restoring the coast and trying to close off crevasses where we do dredge, we've now achieved this is the largest wetlands restoration project in the world. We're over 15,000 acres now, which is about equivalent to the size of Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. This is an old map. It was published in 1803. I think it was related to the Louisiana Purchase. And one thing I want to pick out here is on the west side, that's the lower Mississippi River from basically New Orleans on down to the passes. On the west side, there's a channel about bottom half. I didn't know what that was. I'd driven by it a million times, but it's no longer connected. And what I learned was this is one of the things that James Buchanan Eads did when he opened up Southwest Pass. If we come back to that garden hose analogy, what he did was he shut that off to keep the flow in the river. If you have a garden hose and you work in the yard and have a fancy nozzle, you don't want to use the mist spray when you're trying to move dirt. You want to have the jet. That's what Eads knew. We seem to forget that, something that engineering showed 150 years ago. That's very much a simple principle of a lot of the restoration that I promote. We can go to the next slide, hopefully wrapping up. So this is a shot of the Mississippi River Delta, that Southwest Pass that kind of turns to the right there. You can see a ship down in it. If you look on the what would be the top side of the river there, you see a lot of acreage. Looks like maybe circles. That's material that's been put there as part of the beneficial use. This is part of that 15,000 acres. And yet, at the bottom side of the picture, there's a couple of little crevasses. That's how nature tries to make land in the lower river. But one of the challenges comes back to relative sea level rise. The delta's drowning, and you can't really build land above the water line substantially for sure with the water itself. So dredging, the mechanics of dredging, the beneficial use of dredge material is something that we believe in and we've seen work. There's a lot of controversy here. You can create subaquatic vegetation and you can create what looks like land with diversions or crevasses, but you cannot walk on that land. With that, I'll close up. Sorry if I went over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. And let me come back. We're running a little late, but this is a really important area. Deb, it is depressing to find so many projects are taking so long to get built. And we seem to be getting further and further behind every year. You've worked, and I know Waterways Council has worked to have co-funding of projects, and we had the infrastructure bill. What's a strategy for getting ahead of this rather than continuing to get behind?
Well, we have been working for forever with the Corps on trying to improve their project delivery, but we're excited about a study that we are doing with HDR. We're going to be rolling this out actually at our annual Waterways Symposium. It's going to take place in December in the 9th and the 10th of December in Nashville, where we will talk about a number of recommendations that we are taking directly to Corps headquarters. And some of the things I mentioned in my presentation, getting better at cost estimations. If the Corps says they need $100 for a project, just in easy terms, we go to Congress and ask for $100 for that project. And then, we go to the appropriators, we get that $100, but then we find out soon after that it's not $100 that's needed, it's $500 that's needed. And so, then that member of Congress has to go back to the Corps and say, and to WCI to say, how were you so off on your cost estimation? So we need to get better at that. We need to have earlier contractor involvement and keeping them involved in the entire process. I mean, that seems like it should have been, done from the very start, but it's something that needs to get better, and it needs a reminder. And so I think there's several ideas that we will, unleash and work with the Corps on, and we do hope to get better. I mean, some of the things too is, just the cycle of the commanders coming in, and then they're only in for a period of time and then they move on. So that's something we'll not be able to change, but I think some of the recommendations we have will definitely make a difference. It's not a funding issue, though. It's not a funding issue. We really are grateful to Congress for being able to plus up those funding requests. So it's not that. That's not the issue.
Now, I remember about a year ago that we heard, or a year or 2 years ago, we heard that there was an $8 billion shortfall for locks and dams. Is that still the case?
There's a backlog. I don't think it's quite that high. They have made significant progress on trying to get those projects knocked down and changing some of the elements of the design. But there is a backlog, and that's something we have to work on, not only moving things forward, but finishing off the other elements of the project. So yeah.
Okay, very good. Sean, I am hearing that we need a national salt water intrusion defense plan. Yes?
Yes, drinking from the Mississippi River, I'd love to see it happen here, but nationally, it's part of relative or sea level rise, relative sea level rise here because of the subsidence that makes it worse. If Louisiana is not the most susceptible area in the world, it's definitely in the top three. We see a lot of these changes, and we're battling saltwater. And you know, the river depends on precipitation. We used to get more snow, we're getting less rain. But the long range predictions, I don't want to upset anybody, but I was saying 2019, which was the largest volume of water to ever come down the river, we are being told, get used to it. This is how it's going to be. We're going to have more precipitation. Well, since that time, we haven't seen that. In fact, we started to see more and more droughts. Now we're hearing that's more prevalent. Um, but for the river system, it depends on that flow and keeping flow and being smart about it. And it's a marriage for fresh water, which of course is hugely important to in navigation. I mean, two very critical things to the country, to the state, to the river system, and they're tied together, and we have to be smarter about projects that will promote both.
Thank you, Sean. Emily, one quick question. How far behind is the United States on icebreakers? Do you know?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Um, I did read a government report that was in 2016 about how they are definitely aware that we need to start thinking about Arctic navigation. They didn't mention icebreakers necessarily, but they did talk about how Canada lacks a lot of the infrastructure that Russia presently has. So they're definitely aware.
Well, we are collaborating with Finland, and the Trump administration actually has been on the mark on that one. But it looks like this is going to be a long-term issue if that route is going to work. And one of the things I heard from somebody at Maersk last year was he said that the weather is tricky and that for you to rely on that as a scheduled route is a bad idea because even in the summertime, things can take a turn for the worse. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely. It's really hard to forecast storms up there. It's
Okay,
risky. Yeah.
very good. Thank you all very much. We are really running behind, but I am got to allow at least opening for questions here. So does anybody have a question for our panelists here? Going once, going twice. Okay, guys, thank you very much for your presentations. We are going to be back on these issues again. They ain't going away. The lock and dam system is critical. We have a lot of agriculture and a lot of stuff that goes down the river. Sean mentioned now we have low water problems. As soon as you start complaining about that, next year we'll start to have atmospheric rivers, and we'll be going in the other place, and then we'll have problems with the existing locks, Deb. So,
or maybe we'll solve all the problems next year by next year.
okay. Thank you guys all very much for your presentations.
Thanks so much.